Gentlemen,
can I please have your attention?
Can you dig it?
Mr. Miyagi getting ready to heal Daniel-san. Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. That faint chuckling you heard in the background should give up the ghost of what's going on here. We have returning the most frequent guest on the Remnant and the most frequent guest host of the Remnant. He's basically, who was Johnny's number one guest host? Was it I don't want to say Bill Cosby.
No. I believe it was I'm drawing a blank on her name. She was fashion critic, hilarious comedian. Look at us. We've already run into a chuck hole. We're 2 minutes into it. But I think it was Joan Rivers.
Joan Rivers. I was literally about to Google famous female comedians.
And Gary Shandling.
Gary Shandling is a big one. I think Steve Martin did it a bit,
Steve Martin did it. And of course, Jay Leno. The reassuringly unfunny Jay Leno.
Yes, but he makes up for it with chin.
That's right.
So anyway, it's lovely to have you here. I was News Nation politics poobah, columnist for the Dispatch, colleague at the American Enterprise Institute, and fellow Gen X nostalgist.
Right.
So I've been meaning to give you grief about this for a very long time. I mentioned it on a solo podcast at some point.
Oh no!
So both loved and was extremely jealous that you got Mike Duncan to come on to talk about Rome amidst all of the men constantly thinking about Rome chatter from a few months ago. And your setup was great for it. It was like, men, this viral TikTok thing has become this thing about how men spend so much of the time of their day or their week thinking about Rome. And so we thought we would have Mike Duncan on here to talk about Rome. And then you never asked him, why do you think men think so much about Rome? Who was like the guy to have on to ask that question of?
Well, first, let me say, it is a privilege always to be with you.
Fair.
Thank you. That I like to think of myself as the crescent roll of the Remnant. Useful for any occasion, reliable, and you can keep me in the fridge. And if it's Thanksgiving and you need a pastry, you just pop me right out, put me on the cookie sheet. It is a role that I relish. I should have probably asked Mike Duncan that, but the question I would have phrased it this way. Why do you think we think so much about Rome? Because I don't know that men think about Rome as much as popular culture currently suggests. Do you think that I think it's overstated? What do you think?
So I don't know. I am in the team think about Rome at least once a day camp. Have been basically ever since I wrote Suicide of the West, or maybe ever since HBO's Rome show came out. I don't know, but I've been on it has significant real estate in my head. But then I meet people who I would think it was true also of, and they're like, what are you talking about? Statistics and sampling better than I do, right? There's a selection bias thing. The people who stormed the social media to say, it's me, I'm like this, they were motivated to say it, while the people who aren't like that just stayed quiet. So it gave it a disproportionate feel, maybe. So you might be right.
For me, my most recent obsession with Rome, my juvenile or younger obsession with Rome, like a lot of people, probably centered on the movie Gladiator, and that was a way in for me back then, but. It was for me, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I reread or actually read A World Lit Only by Fire, William Manchester's history of the medieval era. of the Middle Ages, and that led me back. All roads lead to Rome, and that definitely led me back. But I would think that maybe this is my age speaking, but when I think about dudes thinking about history, I think dudes think about World War II a lot, and I think dudes think about the Civil War a lot. But maybe that's an American bias. Maybe that is my bias toward American history.
I certainly think you could have had a viral moment where some woman says, "Oh my gosh, my boyfriend tells me that he thinks about World War II at least once a day," because I probably think about World War II, maybe not once a day, but 3 times a week. It just comes into your head, kind of thing. So I don't know. I mean, there was a time when the zombie apocalypse came into my head. I mean, the truth is, you should probably count the amount of time it wasn't in my head.
You definitely went on a journey with zombies. I also think Rome is safe. It's far enough back that it is not tinged by modern politics, right? If you're talking about the Civil War, you're talking about slavery, you're talking about all those things. Rome, at a remove of 1,500 to 2,000 years, is far enough back that I think, and Mike Duncan does this. I think a lot of historians do it. You can explore the politics and issues and history of Rome, make parallels to modern times, but not get sucked right into the vortex of, oh yeah, well, it was really the Democrats or anything like that.
My take on it is that it's more like a parallel universe in your head, right? It's like, okay, so this is like the superstructure of like how societies work, or our minds work, or politics work, if we had gone on this other path. And it's sort of like the parallel universe thing in the original one, in the parallel universe where Spock has a goatee in Star Trek. The similarities are as interesting as the differences, and it's kind of like this sort of acid test for you to think about how the world around you and what's illusory and what's real and permanent, and that's sort of how it gets into my head. But I know lots of dudes who just like to think about gladiatorial fights. So I mean, it's different strokes for different folks.
That's by the way how you have the dispatch interns settle disputes. I think people should know it's a net, it's a trident, it's real.
Yeah, although the real impulse for that was that scene in Dark Knight where the Joker breaks the pool cue and says we're going to have tryouts. All right, we should do a little punditry before we get back to the important stuff. The GOP primary, which is still, it's contrary to anything you might say, is technically still going on, seems to be boiling down to a 2-person race as foretold in the Shanshu prophecy. The fighting between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, which I think has been stupid for a very long time, in the way that politics is like normally in the before times, politics would be stupid. And you say, okay, this is stupid. Like the idea that either of them are going to be lick spittles to China, I just find to be just sort of tedious. Regardless, the fighting is getting a little nasty. We're starting to see the whole, did you know that Nikki Haley is the daughter of immigrants and Nikki's not her real name? Start to get pushed out there.
Big if true.
Big if true. How do you think that's shaping up? Ron DeSantis got the endorsement of Vanderplatz. And before that, the Kim Reynolds. Nikki is getting the ka-ching endorsement of a lot of donors. How do you think it's shaping up?
I think you could say that Ron DeSantis is a better version of 2016 Ted Cruz, and Nikki Haley is a better version of 2016 John Kasich. And the grooves, the wagon ruts in the road are well laid. And you see a lot of the Cruzism in DeSantis. And by the way, DeSantis's campaign was built to go up against somebody like Nikki Haley, right? That's the idea, which is that's the kind of candidate he beat in 2018 in the Republican primary in Florida, right? DeSantis is a populist favorite if he's up against a traditional conservative, right? And that the attacks on her connections to corporate America, his attacks on her as basically old-fashioned, he's made for that fight. he was not, as it turns out, at all well made for the fight against Donald Trump. Right? That's just that was a big failure. And the strategic failure of DeSantis of believing, and we've talked about it before, but Jeff Rowe, the leader of his super PAC, and DeSantis, his own campaign, started out with the wrong premise, which is we'll blow up Trump's base and have so much vote share that we don't need to worry about, we can call it the Kasich lane or whatever you want to call it. But that's the 25% of the Republican Party that is anti-Trump, plus whatever share of the moderate or persuadable part of the party that just wants to basically win, right? This is less ideological than cultural. It's less ideological than pragmatic. And DeSantis did not pay enough attention to that part, attacked Trump early, failed in attacking Trump, immediately, not in a matter of weeks, gave up all of half of his support back to Trump, basically. And then he went through the long period of suffering and now is deploying. I'm assuming that he secured Kim Reynolds' endorsement in Iowa long ago. And it was, we've got to wait until we're closer for it to be useful. We've got to wait until we get there. So this is the fight that DeSantis has been getting ready for a year, for 2 years, except it comes after having failed in the first part of the strategy. Bust up Trump and then go kick around the traditional conservatives or moderates or whatever, demonstrate your dominance, and then cruise to victory. What we're heading for now is a scenario in which, and I don't rule out the possibility that DeSantis could win Iowa. He could win Iowa. Iowa has a real volatile electorate. We don't know how many of the Trump folks really would show up to caucus. It takes a long time. It's annoying. But we are set up right now for a DeSantis, Iowa, Haley, New Hampshire, finishing second, and then the two of them ripping each other's faces off for 32 days on the way to South Carolina. That's the scenario in which and by the way, with Vivek Ramaswamy along the way doing the wet work for Trump, right? Magnifying each attack from Haley to DeSantis and from DeSantis to Haley. That would get a similar result as the Cruz-Kasich showdown that happened when similar events played out in 2016.
Okay, let's take a second to hear from our sponsor, Aura Frames. Here's a simple but meaningful gift idea for that grandparent or parent or friend or spouse who lives across the country or even just down the block. A digital picture frame from Aura. It's the perfect gift for sharing pictures of all the things your friends and loved ones can't be there for or just want to remember, from family vacations to their grandkids' graduation. I have an Aura frame. I look at it all the time. It's in our living room. It's a conversation starter. I gave one to my mom before she passed away. And I've had other ones in the past that are clunky, hard to use. These things are incredibly simple. You download this app on your phone. You put whatever pictures from your photo album on your phone into the thing. You can set the interval for how often the picture changes. You can swap out pictures whenever you want. It's really just an amazingly simple, easy to use, and really pretty thing. It's also, it's becoming more and more difficult to give gifts that are distinctive and personal. And what's more personal than shared memories, pictures of loved ones, in my case, lots of pictures of dogs. And so anyway, it's really simple to use. You just download the app, connect the frame, and then you're ready to put whatever photos you want to put into it. Aura Frames was named the best digital photo frame by Wirecutter. And it's easy to see why. From now through Black Friday and Cyber Monday, visit auraframes.com and get $40 off their best-selling Carver matte frame with the code REMNANT. This is their best deal of the year, so get yours now. That's Aura, AURA frames.com with the promo code REMNANT. Terms and conditions apply. So the way I've been thinking about it, and I very much like the point, which I had not thought of, is that this is like the second stage plan kicking in, but they failed the first stage plan, which is, I think, right. And there will be seminars for years about why the first stage plan didn't work. The way I've been thinking about it is DeSantis is better placed to unify the existing GOP coalition. And Haley is better placed to forge a winning presidential coalition. Do you think that's right?
I don't think that ideology matters that much. I don't think that
I'm not basing that on ideology. I'm basing it on like animal spirits. Like there are people, there are like independents, squishy Republican or former Republican suburban people who are just not scared of Nikki Haley the way they're scared of Ron DeSantis. And those people are kind of necessary. And also, like, I think Charlie Cook was the first guy to make this point, British Charlie Cook, Roundhead Charlie Cook, that Nikki Haley is closest to generic Republican. And generic Republican is the most powerful form of politician in America today. Right. You know, that's my point about her being better for a general election coalition.
Yes, on that point, absolutely. Of any of the contenders, of any of the three contenders for Republicans, she's pretty clearly the best choice. She's pretty clearly the best choice for her genericness. And I wrote about this for the Dispatch last week. Her greatest asset is that she is not well defined. Now that is a problem because as you run for president, you get defined. But she has basically 30% or so of Americans don't know enough about her to have an opinion about her. And that's good because there's a chance that they'll break. If they just broke even, right? If 15% decided they didn't like her and 15% decided that they did, she'd be way ahead of Trump and Biden and DeSantis in terms of public opinion, public attitudes about her. I think that being a woman would be very helpful for Republicans at this point. And also, of course, if she's somehow survived, she would have borne the scars of being attacked for being moderate, right? She would spend the next 3 or 4 months being attacked inside the Republican Party by Trump and DeSantis as being too moderate, too mainstream. And that's very helpful, right? When you get to the general election, if you survive it. I think what it really comes down to is this, though. Ron DeSantis obviously hates running for president. He is obviously uncomfortable. He obviously does not like, I think Ron DeSantis likes government. I think he likes being the governor of Florida. I think he likes that stuff. But I think he hates politics and seems very unhappy and very uncomfortable doing it. I believe it was Ben Smith wrote it, and I'm sorry if it was someone else. But it was a really useful piece recounting Nikki Haley's 2010 victory in South Carolina.
I think that was
I remember it very well. It was astonishingly awful, right? Accusations of infidelity and sexist, gross slime. Republican politics in South Carolina are awful. And the guy who's now the governor of South Carolina, Henry McMaster, he blew out all the stops to really blow up Nikki Haley, and the establishment of South Carolina politics was against her. And so was the sort of the Cruisian chunk. This is obviously before, but the Cruisian chunk was hard on her, and she made it through. I don't know how much Nikki Haley enjoys government, but she evidently likes the hurly-burly of politics. And you have to draw something from it. If Ron DeSantis did not always look like he was having a catheter inserted when he was running for orifice. He would not have the problems that he has because people are, and you can see it when you look at people. This is true of focus groups that I've done, and the polling reflects a lot of it. There's not a lot of ideological valence within people's first choice and second choice. Voters, especially within primaries, are responding to the person, right? It's much more, oh, I like that person, I don't like that person. And DeSantis he really struggles there.
I mean, I've been saying on here forever that I think the real DeSantis isn't I'm not sure he believes it, but the crazy culture war stuff, the very online stuff, I think that's in his head, but the actual DeSantis is the grumpy, wonky guy who read medical papers about COVID and came to his own conclusions, or the guy who got the bridge open really fast. I mean, I think to his credit, I've been saying, I can't take it back now. I've been saying for 20 years that the thing that drives me crazy most about Republican politicians is the ones who don't do their homework. Sarah Palin, Rick Perry, Fred Thompson, these guys had this organic, charismatic relationship with voters, but they just didn't do their homework. They just didn't know answers to basic questions and like what their policies would be. And I find that sort of basically unpatriotic and unforgivable. Like, you're running for president of the United States, read the binder, right? Do your homework.
Well, but I think here you can break that into two subgroups. Sarah Palin was an enthusiastic ignoramus. She, like Trump, was scornful of knowledge and research and all of that stuff, right? That's for eggheads. That was the George Wallace, these pointy heads looking down their noses at us. We're not going to take instructions from somebody who couldn't park a bicycle straight, blah, 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 blah. And, but then you have people like Fred Thompson, and that's the peril that politicians like Haley face. And she obviously is a hard worker. Fred Thompson knew a lot of stuff, was very smart, had been deeply steeped since working for Baker and on the Watergate committee, and he was around all of that stuff. He just didn't want to do the work. Right?
Now, he was burnt out. He just wanted to phone it in. I agree. I mean, like,
he didn't want to do the hustle side, right? The pressing the flesh. And I think DeSantis is that guy.
I think that's right. He doesn't have, like, if Mitt Romney could have bought the charismatic relationship with the voters, he would have, right? He would have written that check. Sometimes you can't do that, right? I mean, and I think Mitt Romney was perfectly happy to press the flesh. He's a charming guy in person and all that kind of stuff, but he just didn't have that connection. DeSantis doesn't have the connection, and he also is not happy to press the flesh. So it's really,
that's right.
It's a double problem. I can't remember who told me this story. I don't think it was you, but maybe it was. And if it was confidential, we'll just cut it out. But someone had told me a story about how Fred Thompson at a major fundraiser for his presidential campaign, they couldn't find him anywhere. It was at some rich guy's house. And finally his aides, they go upstairs and they find him alone on a bed in one of the master bedrooms watching the football game.
Fantastic.
Which makes me like the guy.
I was going to say, but like, immediately makes me wish that he had been president.
Yeah, but it's like, but you can't do that when you're running for president,
Yeah, how you get there. It's very hard for people in politics to give up the things that made them successful in the first place. And we see it again and again and again. This is what took me there. Now I've got to change. Now I've got to change course and come at this a different way. Nikki Haley has benefited enormously from being underestimated. She benefited enormously from being underestimated in 2010, and has risen to second place or third place from fifth or sixth place on the basis of being underestimated. And her Spitfire routine at the first Republican debate and her sassy boss lady energy that she has brought to the campaign trail, she defied expectations. Now the question for her is, okay, you got the luck. They're looking in. The people are looking at you. They're going to evaluate you. They're going to see how you do. And as I observed, the ill-conceived and poorly executed launch of a new policy on social media anonymity is a great example. When you're in sixth place, say whatever you want. Nobody cares, right? As Vivek Ramaswamy found out, whatever. Oh, you're going to raise the voting age to 25? You're going to, whatever. Up next, a crazy idea from a long shot candidate. He's here to tell us about it. It's fine. But then when you get a look from voters and you get a look from the media, the bar goes way up. And of course, Trump had a different bar because he didn't need to get famous. Trump was already famous he was, I wrote, he's the most famous person since Dwight Eisenhower to be a first time. And he wasn't really a first time because he ran really before in 2020. Stipulate. But really, the most famous first time presidential candidate since Dwight Eisenhower, albeit for very different reasons. But Trump was working his leverage in reverse. He was sharing his celebrity. I always think of the Mark Halperin and John Heilman riding on a Zamboni at the Woolman ice rink with Donald Trump when Donald Trump was just a long shot candidate. And here they are, the three of them huddled on the back of the Zamboni, asking those tough questions like, what's a day like for you?
Yeah.
What is it like to be Donald Trump? He got easier treatment because he was leveraging his celebrity to get into politics as opposed to trying to get famous from in politics to out, the Obama versus Trump celebrity model. For Haley, she has to be careful now. And it's hard to be careful when you're still trying to get famous, right? It's really hard to be careful because you're looking for stuff, you're doing stuff, but she can't afford that misstep on social media. That's one, but she can't afford many, right? If she blows up a couple more times, DeSantis, I'll put it this way. If you were just setting Vegas odds, who will be the runner-up for the Republican nomination? Today, you'd make Ron DeSantis the favorite. I think the trend can help Haley, but you'd say, yeah, DeSantis is the cruise here, right? He's the one that will hang in with Trump the longest. He's from a big state. He can hang in here longer. He's more famous. And that's what you'd say. So she has a very tricky effort here to climb over this fence without putting a foot wrong. And she certainly can do it. And she has, as we talked about from South Carolina, the skill set to do it, but it's tough.
No, I generally agree with that. I have a slightly different view on I agree with you, it was a misstep, the anonymity. And for listeners who don't know, what happened was Nikki Haley was on some daytime Fox show and said something about how you shouldn't be allowed to do social media anonymously, and that she's going to require everyone to use their real names and the real identity. And people blew up. Federalist Papers were written anonymously, yada, yada, yada. And then, and of course, all the anonymous accounts that love DeSantis lost their minds. And,
Right.
And then so she clearly backtracked, said, oh, I'm talking about foreign bots, not about American citizens. I agree with you. It was a misstep. She clearly had to fix it. On the other hand, if you're going to have a misstep about something, I don't think this one was that bad because right? There's kind of a subtext to it where she is a concerned mom about what like social media is doing to people's brains, right? That's sort of the vibe of that thing. B, it kind of signals that she was, anti-China TikTok on the whole thing. And C, the number of people in America who actually really care about the ability to be anonymous on the interwebs is freaking tiny. They're just incredibly overrepresented on social media because that's why they care about it, right? And so, I mean, like the whole Twitter is not the real world thing played into this to make it seem like a much bigger deal than I think it actually was.
I don't think that it is into itself a big deal, particularly because she cleaned it up the next day. Oh, no. She went from Fox to CNBC, and between the two, well, what I'm just talking about is the foreign ones. And she was already cleaning it up. My point is, I don't think that has a material effect on many votes, right? Certainly not among, yes, for DeSantis people hating her more, yes, absolutely. Does it give ammunition to them? Sure. But you're right. My point is, it was a little, for me, useful in explaining how hard it is to do this. Because if you want to float policy when you're a long shot, it doesn't get scrutinized. Once you become a contender, you face a different you face a different lens. And if the net effect for this is, hey, it will be a net good for her if the effect on her campaign is to say, okay, we're not freelancing any more policy on the Faulkner focus on weekday afternoons on Fox and Friends or on Fox. If we have policies that we want to roll out, we're going to vet them. We're going to nail them down. We're going to talk about how we're going to talk about them. And we're going to have our policy people. Because again, you're going from a smaller campaign to a larger campaign. The money starts to flow in. And so you've got to build it out. But to an analogy that has often been used before, it's like repairing your engine while you're driving 70 miles an hour down the interstate. It's tricky.
All right, let's get off the primaries. Enough of the primaries. I feel like I'm obliged to do some Biden and Trump punditry. Biden just celebrated his 81st. I wouldn't say he celebrated it. He marked his 81st birthday.
Did you see that cake?
I did.
My goodness.
I don't understand people sometimes. They put a lot of candles on it.
It looked like the campfire, and Joe Biden looked terrified. He looked like his General Fire Marshal Bill vibe was not helped by having a towering inferno of fondant in front of him.
How did I even get into this?
Biden's old.
Breaking. Biden's old.
Yes.
And he will not get younger. Democrats are freaking out, but not in front of cameras for the most part. Let's skip all the punditry about why he can't have Kamala Harris run, because we know she's even less popular. Put it this way. I talk me out of this. I look at Trump and I say, there's no way this guy can win. Then I look at Biden and I say, man, this guy could lose. Right? So
yep.
How are you looking at this stuff? A year out, polls don't matter, yada, 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 but the polls do matter because they're directional and yada, yada, yada. And I find the whole thing is really important, but it's also because this is the life we have chosen. But I also find it exhausting.
Well, Biden is taking a lot of incoming for his support for Israel. And younger voters are angry at Joe Biden. So the NBC News poll, which used to be the Wall Street Journal NBC News poll before the Wall Street Journal got out and hired Trump's pollster to be its Republican pollster, which was an interesting choice. Mm-hmm. But the NBC poll, which is one of my favorites, one of the best, looked at Biden's shrinking support, and it got a lot of headlines for its shrinking support. But when you look at Biden versus Trump head to head, and this was the first NBC poll where Biden trailed Trump, it was by 2 points. And Trump gained basically no ground from July when Biden was winning, but Biden dropped 5 points. When you look at job approval among Democrats, particularly among younger Democrats, it is very obvious to me that Israel is driving the thing, right? As you say, it's a surprise to no one that Joe Biden is old. It is his single greatest liability in winning a second term is that he is obviously too old to run for president. And it was, I believe, an irresponsible choice of Joe Biden to seek a second term, and of his wife and those people around him. The story of this election would be very different if after the midterm elections, Joe Biden had said, hey guys, we did better than we thought we were going to do. And things are going okay. That's why I'm going to step aside now and let Kamala Harris and J.B. Pritzker and Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer go fight it out. They're going to go fight it out, and I'm going to be happy to endorse whomever Democratic voters choose. And then went off and had a fun lame duck with Mitch McConnell trying to pass some budget measures or whatever would delight Joseph R. Biden the most.
They would look good together, whittling and drinking lemonade.
Oh, I can, and the Pepperidge Farm remembers. But much like the surprise victory in Georgia in the runoff elections there for Democrats that gave him a Senate majority in 2020, the surprising lack of failure for Democrats in 2022 told Biden and told Democrats, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe Dark Brandon's working. Maybe this is working. And I think had the expected thrashing come, the pressure on Biden from himself and from others to step aside would have been huge, right? Joe Biden, who got a shellacking in midterms, would not have been, it wouldn't have been as easy for him to stand pat. But that's where they are. When you look at that poll, the significant things are where Biden's losses are, and they're among Democrats, right? Trump isn't doing better. Trump's floor in a general election is 45%. Trump's ceiling in a general election is 47%, right? That's the space where he is. There's a lot more slack in the line for Biden. So that's one thing. And of course, that looks very different when Democrats come to accept. I heard Michael Che say on Saturday Night Live, which was he's going to win. Like, he said it as an aside, he's going to win. And as soon as that dread, the sickening dread in the hearts of younger Democrats comes into focus, it will change their willingness to beef with Biden over Israel or whatever else. That's true. And then there's this. When you look at the poll, pollsters asked Trump versus generic Democrat and Biden versus generic Republican. The shift is notable, right? Because Trump versus generic Democrat, Trump loses. But Biden versus generic Republican, Trump the other way around. If you take Biden out, it has a much more salubrious effect. I'm sorry, I've now butchered this 5 different ways. Your takeaway is Trump is a bigger drag on Republicans than Biden is on Democrats. Replacing Trump has a more significant effect on the electorate than replacing Biden. A generic Republican, as you said at the beginning of this, a generic Republican crushes, right? Now, no candidate is generic, but the willingness for the country to have somebody who is not so old to be in power is palpable, is real. They're more than ready to take a chance on that. And when you see what a drag Trump is on Republicans, it's I think it would be unfair to say that only Trump could lose to Biden, because DeSantis could lose to Biden, Haley could lose to Biden, but Trump is far and away the riskiest bet against a vulnerable incumbent. But I think the Republican electorate is not willing to abandon Trump because they feel like it would be giving in to Biden and the media, right? The defiant act of supporting Donald Trump. We don't care. You can indict him. You can indict him 191 times. We don't care. You're not making us back down. I think that's a big chunk of it. And the other chunk of it is significant. And I think you saw in the cataclysm around the House speakership. The plurality of Republicans just want somebody, right? Just be done. We don't want to fight. And the idea for a lot of Republicans of we're going to have a long contested contest. We're going to fight. We think of Ted Cruz and his lame-o speech at the Republican convention in 2016. Remember, vote your conscience. He got the next day to the state Republican, or the delegates from Texas went to a breakfast the next day and they booed him. Boo, boo, boo. Because they just want people to get along and they just want unity and they want to go deal with the Democrats. Trump running as basically the incumbent gets that, right? That's that. Okay, look, it's going to be Trump. Let's not fight him. Let's just go. And when you combine actual MAGA plus anti-Trump Republicans, right, and then the can't this just be done, that gets you to half of the party.
I was going to do more punditry, but I want to change the topic slightly. I had this disagreement with Ryan Salam, who I'm on this new Chris Wallace show with couple times a month.
Congratulations. What a nice thing. What a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's still got its sea legs, but generally it's smarter television than a lot of television, and it's
Talk
nice
about damning with faint praise.
Well, true. Well, I mean, I don't love doing television anymore. I am not the stylish Beau Brummel savant of the silver screen the way you are.
Just some crescent rolls over here. Just that's all it takes, Jonah. You are like a boule of fine sourdough. I am but a moldable pastry placed on a baking sheet.
Okay, well, we are going to go deep into baked goods analogies and puns in a moment, but first, bula bula. So we part of my disagreement I had to have off camera, but like, we did this segment, which I think is entirely worthwhile segment, about what to make of Donald Trump's increasingly gross language, right? The vermin, retribution, yada, yada, yada. And I think it was Rahan, but like one of the points that was made, which I think is just generally right, is that a lot of liberals are freaking out about it, less because Donald Trump is saying it and more because voters aren't turned off by it, right? There's something that freaks people out, that understandably, right? It's like, wait, the former president of the United States running for office again is vowing to eliminate the vermin in this country. And I still think that the line that Trump said, that it's the preface to the vermin thing that is more damning and dangerous, where he said the foreign threats in the United States pale in significance to the threats from people at home, right? So he is the one who is actually saying, in terms of actual enemies of the United States of America, other Americans are worse than Hamas or Russia or China or other terrorist groups or whatever. And that's repugnant and indefensible. But I don't think a lot of people's ears pick up on it. Anyway, the point being, I have this theory, which is not a defense of Trump. I think my record on Trump is pretty good, at least pretty well known. But that this idea that the Republican Party is turning into a fascistic, authoritarian party, which, I want to stipulate, there are reasons why reasonable people worry about that. Fine, right? That said, I think one of the ways to test whether or not the evidence that people muster for that proposition is to ask, okay, what would happen to Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or Tim Scott or Vivek Ramaswamy or any other Republican candidate if they talked about how the vermin in the government will be eliminated? I'm going to put all of my political opponents on trial. They're worse threats to the Republic than any foreign terrorist. It would destroy their campaigns instantaneously. And so the point I'm making is that, it's a difficult point to make, because it sounds like you're defending Trump, and I am not defending Trump, and I'm not defending people who love hearing this garbage from him. But at the same time, as a matter of objective analysis, I think people process Trump's statements as a form of entertainment more than they do other candidates. And so it's not necessarily ideological. It's not ideological agreement or receptivity. It's like, oh, that's Trump. And, like, you don't understand. I have this secret understanding of Trump. He doesn't really mean these things. Sure, he goes off the
literally,
rails,
but not seriously, but not
all that
literally.
garbage, right? And
yes.
And so it just makes it very, very difficult for me to sort of score this out properly. What is your view on it? Like, should we take it? How seriously should we take him talking about the vermin and the scum and yada, yada, yada?
Well, if Donald Trump wins the Republican nomination again and wins the presidency again,
I'll be in my Sprinter.
It will be, history will remember, for as long as there is history, the consequences for the Republic. I'm very sure. A Trump one-off, Zachary Taylor, whatever. Like a one-off with Donald Trump, and you say they were having a moment, right? They were having a hard time, and Hillary Clinton was awful, and we can rehearse here all of the things that people have said about Donald Trump. He spoke for the anger of the We could talk about the consequences of the Iraq War. We could talk about the consequences of the Panic of 2008 on older voters. We can talk about all kind of stuff, and it would all be true. And if you did it one time, then you'd say it was a weird moment, something happened, and then they found a new normal. You renominate him, and if you reelect him, a person who is not just a demagogue, right, but a cruel demagogue, right, a rotten person, that changes the people who do it, right? And you've talked about this a lot, about the consequences for the people. Very convincingly, very interestingly, you talked about what were the effects of oppression on the oppressors, right? In colonialism and those things, that it was bad for the Raj was bad for Britons too, because it changed their thresholds. And I hate the word normalized because of its overuse, but you define deviancy down in a pretty profound way when you keep doing it. All of that having been said, if you read all of the coverage in the Times and the Post and elsewhere about what Donald Trump's second term would be like, this is, if he's returned, he will implement these policies. He will do these things. The experience of most Americans and most Republicans about Donald Trump's first term was they didn't do anything, right? He didn't destroy NATO. It didn't happen. That all of the things that people said that he would do, the Muslim ban, and by the way, the things he said he would do, he did not do. The policy high water point for Trump in his presidency is something that, and of his own agenda, was something that another Republican would not have done, and that is the renegotiation of NAFTA. That probably would not have taken place in a Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush. I doubt that it would have. But it was not renegotiated into something weird. It was renegotiated with different terms. It was the same idea, but negotiated with different terms. Other than that, Donald Trump ended up producing a pretty conventional Republican presidency. A lot of conservative judges, a big tax cut, more defense spending. Those things are what they are. These articles that suggest if Donald Trump is reelected, the Heritage Foundation will write the blueprints for the federal government. All of these things will happen. I don't even think that's true, because I think I know what a second term for Donald Trump would look like, and it would be wild. It would be corrupt. It would be nutso, because of who the people, having been there one time, he would know, right? Well, we don't want Bill Barr in here. We don't want Jim Mattis in here. We don't want these squares that are going to say, that's actually very illegal. That's actually very unconstitutional. That's actually
we want Tom Fitton.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The hardcore and a cottage industry, a real industry of Trump policy people sucking up to Trump does exist out there. But the most important thing that Trump would be looking for would be absolute sycophants. He would not end up with the same. He believes he won last time. He believes he'll win again. And it's not going to be like Chris Christie and Mike Pence come in and on off the hip put together an administration. He knows the people that he'd want to do. Oh, and by the way, get ready for, if Trump gets reelected, a lot of acting,
for sure,
agency heads. Oh, not confirmed. Okay, well, you'll have to pass legislation. You'll need 60 votes in the Senate to strip this person of their acting title. Oh, and you can't get the Republicans to go along with that. Okay, fine. So that's a much more vindictive, chaotic, and
also that assumes that what would probably be a Republican Senate wouldn't confirm a bunch of his choices, which I think is quite possible.
Yeah, because there would be, I'm sure, choices that I'm sure Tom Fitton,
right.
51, unless the Republicans ended up with a 55, 56 seat majority, which I don't think is likely. There would be Mitt Romney or who met, well, let's see, will he be gone by then?
Gone, right?
He'll be gone. Susan Collins is not going to say, Secretary Fitton, welcome aboard.
Right.
So all of that is ahead. As far as the appetite among Republicans for hatred, right? For calling people vermin, and for the rise of Nazism or fascism inside the Republican Party. No doubt there is an audience, right? No doubt there is an audience in the Republican Party for that kind of stuff, right? And it's the same audience, by the way, that liked what was the name of the mayor of Philadelphia? Rizzo, who, challenged the gangs to a fight with the cops when he was police commissioner and talked about the scum and did all that stuff of the kind of Giuliani pugnacity and that stuff. Yes, there's an audience for it. It's always been there. By the way, there is also an audience in the Democratic Party for people who say the worst things imaginable about Republicans or about capitalism. Or capitalists. There's always an audience for that among angry people, many of whom have personal experiences that have shaped them, but just a lot of people that they've marinated in a World Wrestling Federation, sports shock jock talk world where and they watch too many movies, and that's where they are. I think most Republicans in Washington would be perfectly fine with Donald Trump getting the nomination again and then losing, right? You get your voters out. They turn out. The Trump voters turn out. Maybe you flip Pennsylvania. Maybe you flip Ohio. Trump turns out the new working class Republican base. He loses the presidency. Republicans get the Senate, and then Trump's all done. And I understand that calculation because it is the path of least resistance. And you figure the general electorate will take care of Trump. And that's what the bright boys in Washington say and think. Yeah. It's sort of like what they did on Trump's lawsuits after the election. Well, you got to let it play out, right? You got to let it work its course. You can't fight it. Or the decision not to convict him when he was impeached for January 6th. Well, look, yeah, I hear you. But you got to let this play out. I agree with you. I don't think the Republican Party has a burgeoning interest in fascistic power grabs and the oppression of political opponents. But I do think that if Trump pulls this off and gets back into the White House, the lasting effects on the Republican Party will be profound.
One of the things I've been struggling with on this podcast for quite a while now is our friend George Will, after his last book came out, he came on here and he said, look, small committed ideological minorities move the world, right? And he was absolutely right about that. That doesn't mean that every small committed ideological minority wins, right? It just means that some of them do, because the Fabian socialists are, are going to, let's put it, the post-liberals will probably go the way of the Fabians and the Shakers.
But a group of fishermen from the Galilean Sea did end up having a pretty profound effect on world history.
Yeah, well, and a bunch of Bolsheviks did, and a bunch of Jacobins did, and a bunch of weird Enlightenment thinking British colonists did, a bunch of neocons did. I mean, there are lots of, basically every successful ideological movement starts as a small minority movement, right? And so, but even the ones that fail can do enormous damage, particularly when they are inside the White House. And so, the one of the most troubling things for me was I can't remember if it was the Washington Post or the New York Times, but the big piece about this sort of heritage, whatever these other America's First Institute or whatever the MAGA think tanks are, they're looking to find non-Federalist Society lawyers because, as someone put it, Federalist Society lawyers don't know what time it is, right? And for those who don't know what time it is this code phrase. I always read it as Hail Hydra.
Yes.
It's basically you are part of the red-pilled Flight 93 world where you think America is on the precipice of total implosion and therefore you need to fight by any means necessary, fair or unfair, principled or unprincipled, legal or illegal, to ensure the survival of somebody for something. And
right.
It's this code for people who are switched on to this, to use the term,
yes.
correct term, bullshit. And
yes.
And so the interesting thing to me is when you play out what that actually entails, right? Because they're not going to get a lot of MAGA judges, right? A lot of non-Federalist Society, MAGA, politics as the crow flies, do whatever the dear leader wants, judges appointed. What they're going to do is get really fifth and sixth rate crappy lawyers. The Tom Fitton types. Although Tom Fitton, let us be clear for people who don't get the reference, he's the head of Judicial Watch who told Trump he had no problem keeping classified information because of some completely irrelevant case that Judicial Watch had against the Clintons. And, oh, by the way, Tom Fitton's not a lawyer, which is the best part of it. And
but you should see what he can bench press.
Yeah, but he is like a lot of these guys who know what time it is. He eats a lot of creatine powder and has very large biceps and
swole.
And so it seems to me that the sort of Banonista types, what their plan is to do lawless things and then have lawyers defend them in court and then lose. And then they get to say either Andrew Jackson style, they've made their decision, now let's see them enforce it and throw us into a constitutional crisis, or galvanize and radicalize a big chunk of the GOP to be like, we were stabbed in the back by these rhino judges. This shows you how corrupt and pervasive the deep state is, and create a whole different kind of radical politics out of that. And that's not either Nazism or fascism, although, there's some parallels, obviously. But it's really, really bad. And I can just see it coming down the pike. And I don't think it really matters whether the average Republican pro-Trump voter wants that or not. They will go along with it the same way Mike Lee goes along with this stuff when it actually happens.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a lot of ruin in a nation, but there is a limit. What we saw with George W. Bush in his signing statement on the McCain-Feingold campaign, I think this is unconstitutional, but I'm going to sign it anyway because that's what the people want. Or in Barack Obama and the Dreamers, I don't have the powers of a king. Oh, well, maybe I do. We'll see what the courts say. And then with Trump being 7 times refused by Congress, even under Republican control, in money for the border wall, and say, okay, well, I'll just take it from the Department of Defense. You can take me to court. You can sue me. And then Biden, excuse me, and then Biden famously, and a most effulgent example, hey, I think you should extend the moratorium on evictions. Nancy Pelosi, nah, we'd rather not. Why don't you just do it? Okay, well, I don't think I have the power, but maybe we'll see what the Supreme Court says. That's a real garbage way to protect and defend the Constitution. And the game that parties have been playing for a long time is exactly what you say. Okay, we probably don't have the power to do this. It's probably going to fail, but at least we'll get to say that it wasn't our fault, that we tried, right? At least we tried to do this. And we'll be able to blame the courts, particularly if the courts belong to another party. I think exactly that's what would happen in a Trump presidency. We have been living through a constitutional stress test for a long time in the United States now, right? And it is ongoing. The stress test that Trump would bring would be enormous, right? What would Trump say and do if he were on the 2-yard line of the Republican nomination? And let's say Nikki Haley was giving him hell. Let's say it was like, oh, okay, well, she's finished second again and again, and she's right there. And Super Tuesday wasn't decisive. And now we're on to Georgia. Now we're on to other states, and we'll see what happens from here. What wouldn't Trump say or do to assuage the Republican electorate? Yes, he would say, he would start immediately sucking up to the Haley wing of the party. Maybe he would even choose her as his running mate. But I highly doubt that in power, he would make the same mistake from his point of view of surrounding himself with competent, law-abiding people. I think that I think in the story of the Trump presidency, there are a lot of people around Trump that basically say Bannon was right. Reince Priebus was wrong. The mainstream people were wrong. You shouldn't have had them around. You should have had your cadre of ultra loyal, morally flexible radicals around you, and we would have seen what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I get morally flexible, but sometimes some of these people are turning into immorally rigid.
Yeah. All right,
I know you got to go. I feel a little guilty that there was all this dark punditry. Do you have exciting Thanksgiving plans? Do you have unusual West Virginia ways of cooking a turkey that the world needs to know about?
Well, will this will be published after Thanksgiving, or will it be published on or before?
On and immediately after, right? So
okay,
yeah. It's up to Adam. He's got a little flexibility given the week we are having. So
I have very strong feelings about. You would not be surprised to learn that I have very strong feelings about Thanksgiving dinner. You know, obviously some normal ones should be in the afternoon, should be during the day, should not be
like 3?
An evening. Yeah, 3 is great.
Okay.
2 to 4, super. I think that's good. I'm big on a relish tray. I think you need pickles and olives, maybe even some celery. But I think you need that on the table. I think that's important.
Interesting.
And I also feel strongly about my favorite dish for Thanksgiving, which is the dressing. Whether you cook it inside the bird or outside the bird, that's up to you. That's anybody's choice. My sister certainly feels strongly about putting it in the bird. That's fine. Oh, actually, I learned something very interesting about this. Much has been invested in the debate over dressing versus stuffing, and dressing is more common in the South. People say dressing in the South; they say stuffing in the North and West. Basically, is how it breaks down. I've done the research, and because of the invention of stovetop stuffing in 1973. And the way that Americans enjoy and perceive the dish. That predates, by the way, the modern discussion about stuffing versus dressing and health and safety considerations. That I think that the breaking out of the bird part of it predates those considerations fairly dramatically. But I learned the most fascinating thing, which is the split was not about how the dish was prepared, mostly. The split was about women not wanting to say stuffing. And that in the 100 years ago, or in the late 19th century, there's a dirty connotation to stuffing.
Interesting.
Whereas dressing sounds ladylike, and it sounds to the Victorian ear, sounds much less graphic than stuffing something. So we get dressing out of a desire to be proper, to be prim sounding and chaste sounding, as opposed to the more carnal delight of stuffing, which I found extraordinarily interesting.
That's legitimately interesting. I mean, last time you were on here, you gave me the Jewish-Irish nexus of corned beef.
American foodways. I'm here for you, but I do believe that dressing or stuffing, whatever you call it, should be simple, should be humble. It should not have chunks of meat in it. It should not have shellfish in it. It should not have fruit in it. It should be a simple, humble dish of bread and celery and some onions. And I publish it each year in the Dispatch, my recipe for dressing. You can find it at Stirewalt on Politics from last week's edition. I care about these matters, and they matter to me.
Yeah. So I've never been big on the dressing versus stuffing debate. I always had this rule of thumb that dressing was cooked outside and stuffing was cooked inside, and that's the difference between the two. It's sort of like yam versus sweet potato. It's like if you want to have an argument about it, so there are just better things to have arguments about, but because they're basically the same thing, right?
But wouldn't it be great if people argued about that instead of talking about politics?
It would be.
We have not yet fully banished the dumb story about how to talk about politics at your family's Thanksgiving. What should you say to your uncle? Well, here's what you should say. Nothing.
Right.
You should shut up about politics at Thanksgiving. You should enjoy your family. You should love them for who they are. And you should not talk to them about politics. You should talk about the food. You should talk about football. You should tell jokes. You should play cards. You should do whatever you want. But for goodness sakes, this is not the time to talk about politics.
Yeah. So I just wrote my LA Times column, which is up at the Dispatch now, about this basic point. And I think one good rule of thumb should be you should only talk about people everyone at the table personally knows or is related to. And that will rule out 99% of politics. I mean, sports is different, but I'm talking about, like make it about friends, family, memories, that kind of stuff. I disagree with you a little bit about the stuffing issue. Or dressing. My sister-in-law makes this wonderful sausage-based stuffing that I just think is fantastic. I am a big proponent of the deep fried turkey. And I think gravy is the most essential ingredient of the Thanksgiving table. And my mom and now my wife both, my wife was inspired by my mom. We find that Yorkshire pudding is vital to the Thanksgiving table.
Oh dear.
I do not have the baking skills to pull that off in the slightest, but my wife does, and it's pretty friggin' awesome.
That's extraordinarily toity. That is quite so, Brother Goldberg.
Well, my mom was a bit of a wasp in some ways.
Yes.
So anyway, I hope you and the Stirewalt brood have nothing but a delightful Thanksgiving, and we will. I've put pins in various points of the dark punditry here to return to upon a later date. But among all things, I am grateful to have you at the Dispatch and as a friend and as a colleague at the American Enterprise Institute and as a guest on this podcast.
I will very gratefully be tucking my feet under my Jessica's Thanksgiving table and am very glad to be there. And I am sure that one of the people who we know that we will talk about and give thanks for will be you and your Jessica, and how lovely it is to have you as friends and have you in our lives.
I'm glad you added table at the end of that original sentence, because otherwise that was too much information.
It's a different story. It totally did. Dressing, not stuffing.
And with that, Brother Stirewalt, thank you for coming on the Remnant. Okay, so Brother Stirewalt has left the studio. I probably shouldn't have dwelled as long or let him dwell on the GOP primary, because there were other things that were more fun to talk about, and I knew he had a heart out. There are going to be all sorts of like special Thanksgiving podcasts floating around out there in the universe and all that. And I generally find most of those things can be kind of smarmy, even though Thanksgiving is in fact my favorite holiday. And I'll save the smarminess for the solo podcast, which I'm still, I think, going to do, if Adam will let me. I do hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving. If you have questions, comments, concerns about this episode or any other, you can always send them along to the Remnant at thedispatch.com, where we will curate the best questions for our monthly or semi-monthly or occasional AMA episodes, and which if you're a subscriber to the Dispatch, you can find in the skiff. Just go to the website and drop down under podcasts and you'll find it. And also, as Christmas time approaches, I would be loath not to point out that a gift subscription to the Dispatch is a wonderful thing to do for both whoever you give it to, for yourself, and of course for us. So please think about doing that. other than that, happy Thanksgiving from me to all of you, and I will see you next time.
Oh, how wrong thou art. This is a podcast.